So he would take his brief rest in this chair, and the children were so distraught that looked terribly uncomfortable that they bought him this chair. It was comfortable until the springs broke in it. Now there's a hard board with some padding, but it's always tradition for everyone who comes to these rooms to be seated in St. John's chair and to say a few prayers while they're there. Now, Father, while you're there, let me show all of you. I think you can all fit in here if you scoot in. This photograph on the wall. Who are these distinguished people? Everyone kind of come on in. This is St. John's father, Boris, and his mother, Glafira. They lived in Argentina when St. John was the Archbishop of both France and then of San Francisco. Now, again, if I'm working for the chief editor of this magazine, and of which Father Vesselin is the chief editor, if I'm working for Father, he says, okay, Father, I accept your title for the St. John photograph in the living room, but this has no title, so give me a title. And I would say, well, Reverend Father and Chief Editor, I propose the following title for these two pious souls. Quote, extra credit, unquote. Why? St. John says, whoever prays for my mother and father, I myself will pray for that person. So if you all want extra credit with St. John, pray for Boris and Glafira. Okay? This is a schedule of the classes that St. John arranged for the St. Kirill and Methodi Gymnasia when that was 1965. And then the students of the St. Kirill and Methodi school are photographed in this photograph here. And incidentally, this photograph was taken 2 days before St. John passed away. This is one of the last things he did when he was in San Francisco before he flew to Seattle, where he passed away. Now it's interesting, St. John asked each of his acolytes if they would accompany him to Seattle, and they all turned him down. And when he passed away, they realized that he had asked them to accompany him to his death, and they all turned him down. And I knew two of them personally, and when they would tell the story, they would cry. Bishop Peter of the Midwest, Archbishop Peter, was one of them, and he's recorded on video telling about how he turned St. John down. And you can see the sorrow in his face when he expresses his story. Now, the prayer corner that St. John had, you can see directly here. These are the icons in front of which he prayed. There's the desk with the key to the city and county of San Francisco, because the Greek Orthodox mayor of San Francisco, George Christopher, greatly esteemed St. John. This portrait that you see of St. John was painted in front of the doors of the old cathedral where we just came from. And he has Russian-style prosphora in this little satchel. This staff that you see is one of the staffs over in the corner, near his prayer corner. It's the tall one. And the St. John version of the cell phone plan, the Chotki plan, is in evidence here. Now, if you all look in these rows of books, you will see many different languages. I once went through these books and kind of counted the number of languages that I found. You wouldn't believe it. I found Chinese, Hebrew, Latin, Greek, Slavonic, Serbian, Russian, Italian, French, German, Spanish, English, Dutch, Portuguese, and Romanian. Yeah, Sfânta Evanghelia, yeah. So the holy scripture. So, some bishops live in palatial mansions, but St. John lived in a simple monk's cell. Now, incidentally, behind that door, there used to be a little bathroom with a little tub. And I was told by the son of the first Chinese priest that St. John ordained, that St. John was very clean. And I said to Michael, when? I said, what do you mean by that? He said, he took a bath every day. And I had a hard time, kind of imagining St. John with fragrant soaps and shampoos and all of that. And I said, really? In what sense? He said, at 4 a.m, he took a cold water bath. And he pointed to the photograph of St. John in China. That's his office in Shanghai, by the way. He said, even when it was below zero, or below freezing, St. John took a cold water bath every day. And I said, why did he do that? He said, to chase away sleep. Okay, so if you guys ever get tired driving, splash some water on your face and you'll wake up. If you ever read about the lives of the Irish saints before the schism of East and West, they were Irish and Orthodox. They would go into the ocean, into Irish lakes and rivers, and stand with their arms outstretched with the water coming up to their chest. They called it cross vigil. And that was the way that they kept awake. They fought sleep and tamed the passions. So St. John had a similar practice. Every morning at 4, he would take a cold water bath to chase away sleep. Any volunteers? 1 hour sleep, 1 hour a night. He also ate once a day at 11 p.m. Any volunteers?
Yeah, the big dog won't volunteer.
So you know the story of this guy named George, this young boy named George in Shanghai who wanted to imitate St. John. He started eating bread and water and sleeping in a chair an hour a night, and he started just becoming like a zombie. So his parents took him during Lent to see St. John. They took this young man, George, to St. John's office, which is up there on the wall. And they told St. John ahead of time what their son had been doing. And they wanted St. John to have a talk with him. So St. John was ready. George comes into the office, and St. John talks to him a little bit. And it's clear this young boy wants to imitate St. John in everything. And St. John says, okay, very good. So he says, well, the first thing you must do is this. And he calls his cell attendant. And the cell attendant brings a juicy Polish sausage.
I've heard this.
And he puts this in front of George and says, eat it. It's Lent. But he has to obey the bishop. So this Zelotes, this young 14-year-old who wants to be an ascetic like St. John, eats a Polish sausage. And when he's finished, St. John says to him, young man, your only obediences are to attend church as you always do and to be obedient to your parents in everything. He said, obedience is higher than any personal ascetic achievement. So although the young boy was a little saddened he didn't get a special prayer rule, he was obedient. And you know what? He became Father George Larin, a priest on the east coast of our Russian church abroad. And he's been a priest, more than half a century. So above the above the photograph of St. John's mother and father, you see a bishop. That is St. John's great-great-great-uncle, John of Tobolsk, again, after whom he was named in monasticism. So in this little room is the history of a man who influenced everyone over the world and continues to influence people. Everyone just hears about St. John and they're all kind of attracted like a magnet to him. But everyone thinks about St. John's miracles and all of the extraordinary things that he used to do. But he also had a very simple and appealing side. As I mentioned, he ate once a day. And the little Chinese girl you saw in the photograph, Lydia, she was his cook. She cooked for him 1 meal a day at 11 p.m. Now, she told me this in this room. She said, St. John would always wait after he had eaten until she finished washing and drying the last dish before he would get up from the table. And when she said that, you could watch her face and see how much that meant to her, that he would wait and keep her company until she finished everything in the kitchen and was ready herself to go. Then she said, when all the softness and all the tenderness left her face, and she said with a kind of offhandedness, she said, my husband just gets up and goes and watches football. I always get the husbands in big trouble when I tell this story. Big trouble. But she said St. John would stay and keep her company until she had finished everything. He didn't have to say anything. He just prayed and kept her company. So when you all watch that little video, Why Men Don't Listen and Why Women Can't Read Maps, you'll see the significance of this story. So remember now, St. John is somebody that wants you to stay in touch with him, and he doesn't mind if you use your Orthodox cell phone in the Chotki prayer rope plan to stay in touch with him. If you want to put some names and letters under his relics, that is very important. Did I tell you all about the pilgrims from Sydney who came to put, I didn't mention that at the old cathedral. About 8 years ago, 2 ladies came from Sydney. One woman had letters and commemoration slips that she's putting underneath St. John's relics. But her co-pilgrim is thinking, no, he doesn't read all that. Oh, it's just a quaint church legend. And she's being the cynic. So that night, they took their rest at a local motel, and the cynic had a dream of St. John. Normally, when he appears in dreams, he blesses. He's very encouraging. Not this time. No blessing, no smile. And he floated up to her face. He said, I want you to know that I read every name. And he floated back, no blessing, no smile, and disappeared. So the next day, the former cynic is at the relics. So there's no part of our life that is not important to St. John, and we should really strenuously resist any idea that in any struggle that we face that we're alone, because we're not. The saints are our consultants, they're our mentors, they're our resources, and they can't wait to be asked to come and help us. So, Holy Hierarch John, pray to God for us.